You are now tuned into the truth frequency.
We are TFR. TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.
I've been a participant in some of the most insidious lies and witnessed to deeds that no crazed man could imagine. I spent years watching you from my lofty position to know that you were the one I could trust.
And why did you lie to me?
There still exist some secrets which should remain secret. Truths that people are just not ready to know.
Who are you to decide that?
The world's reaction to such knowledge would be far too dangerous.
Dangerous? You mean in the sense of outrage? Like the reaction to the Kennedy assassination, or MIAs, or radiation experiments on terminal patients, Watergate, Iran-Contra, Roswell, the Tuskegee experiments. Where will it end?
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth! Get out!
Or what? You'll kill me?
Always remember, dissension's the greatest form of patriotism.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies.
We have before us the opportunity to forge a new world order.
Yes, we can. And you say.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
A lie is most convincingly hidden between two truths.
Well, I guess it won't end.
No! I don't have time for this. This is about saving the future of humanity.
We know things are bad, worse than bad. We know the air is unfit to breathe and our food is unfit to eat. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther.
I want you to get up right now. Go to your windows, open them, and stick your head out and yell, I'm a human being. My life has value, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You shall not pass!
You're listening to the Revolutionary Radio Project with your host, Rob Skiba.
Hello and welcome to the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and I'm real excited about tonight's broadcast. I'm going to be talking about something quite near and dear to my heart, and that is the issue of the firmament. The scriptures talk about this thing that's over us called a firmament. Now, I've been reading a couple of books that I picked up recently that are a contrary view to what I've been discussing in regard to the biblical cosmology and the topic of flat earth and things like that. Now, of course, we've all read the same books that we got in school, you know, from really kindergarten all the way up through high school and into college. There's no shortage of books out there regarding the spinning heliocentric globe. But I wanted to look at some books that were taking a contrary view to what the scriptures say. And there's one book that I picked up called The Earliest Cosmologies, the Universe as Pictured in Thought by the Ancients. And this is copyright 1909. And it almost reads like it was written as a commentary against the likes of Terra Firma by David Wardlaw Scott, which is copyright 1901. You've heard me talk about several books on this broadcast and on my YouTube channel. Zetetic Astronomy by Dr. Samuel Robotham, 100 Proofs Earth's Not a Globe by William Carpenter and Terra Firma by David Wardlaw Scott. And I would say if you have not at least read those 3 books, you haven't even begun to do any investigation whatsoever on the flat Earth subject. And I've said many times before, condemnation before investigation is the height of ignorance. So if you're going to, base your worldview on the stuff that you've read all through school, then you owe it to yourself to at least look at a competing idea, a contrary point of view. And, 3 books is not too much to ask when you consider all the books that you read regarding the spinning heliocentric globe model. So I read those books last year. And then this year I picked up this book, Earliest Cosmologies. And this is by a guy named William Fairfield Warren. And it's pretty interesting what he tries to do. Basically, he looks at all the ancient cosmologies and then he tries to twist and manipulate everything to suggest that they didn't have the view that we've heard the ancients did of basically a snow globe. But the hoops that this guy jumps through in order to justify his view, it's amazing. I do recommend you read it, though. It is interesting, if for no other reason than to see how people have to jump through hoops, twist and manipulate, and grossly distort ancient texts in order to say it's not talking about a snow globe. But I still recommend the book. Check it out. I'm going to eventually put a link on my Testing the Globe website where you can download it or go buy it on Amazon. But then there's another book that I got that's more recent. This one was published, let's see here, in 2007 by a guy named Gordon J. Glover. It's called Beyond the Firmament, Understanding Science and the Theology of Creation. And similar to the Earliest Cosmology book, this guy is trying to say, well, the Bible... Well, he actually agrees that the Bible does describe basically a snow globe, but he is heavily influenced by modern science. So he's a Christian and he's trying to reconcile. Okay, here's what science says, here's what the Bible says, and he's being brutally honest in both regards. But you can tell that this guy's heavily biased in the scientific worldview. And in chapter 1, he's basically saying, look, we've got to do something about this, and trying to make the Bible fit modern science is not the answer. And he was talking about when he was looking through some of the textbooks of his daughter is going through school, and he's looking through her textbooks, and I guess she's going to a Christian school or something. And anyway, he wasn't too happy with the way the Christian authors were dealing with modern science versus the Bible. And in chapter 1, he says, well, what's going to happen when my daughter goes off to college and takes Astronomy 101 and finds out that we've actually known for years the physical mechanisms by which stars and galaxies were formed? And earlier he talks about all the standard cosmological worldview about how stars are, spinning gas clouds and billions of years ago and blah, blah, blah. He's totally drinking the Kool-Aid on that and accepts it all as truth. And he's saying, well, so what's going to happen when my daughter, after reading these Christian textbooks, goes off to college? Will she then question everything she learned about God? Will she feel betrayed by her parents and teachers? Science has a very successful track record of discovering things that were previously unknown. If we raise our children to believe that supernatural explanations are in competition with natural ones, we are basically entrusting their salvation to ignorance and incredulity. For their sake, we should always leave the door open for the future discovery of a material mechanism that doesn't threaten the theology of creation that we give them. I realize that many readers may have picked up this book for the primary purpose of figuring out how to provide their children a scientific education that doesn't water down science or compromise their faith. One of the best things we can do when it comes to educating Christian kids is to avoid all arguments from ignorance and incredulity. For example, our approach to astronomy should be that God created and organized the heavens as in a primary cause, regardless of whether or not science ever figures out exactly how he did it, as in the secondary causes. By using this approach, the search for a material mechanism becomes a challenging quest to reveal the character of God by discovering the patterns by which he governs the cosmos, rather than an opportunity to lose one's salvation through scientific discovery. By forcing our children to choose between modern astronomy and the Bible, we consign them to either perpetual ignorance or eternal damnation. That doesn't sound like much of a choice to me. For some reason, we tend to think that if we can just keep our little ones ignorant and incredulous of the natural world, they will not be enticed by naturalistic theories when they leave home or take biology and astronomy in high school. We wrongly assume that they won't have any interest in the material machinery behind the spiritual curtain. We don't want their knowledge of God to be supplanted by natural cause and effect. I understand the motivation here, but sooner or later they will look beyond the firmament. And what happens if they realize they have been misled by those to whom their very salvation was entrusted? If we fail to teach our children how to successfully integrate both the primary and secondary causes of nature into a biblical theology of creation that sees God providentially working through the patterned behavior of ordinary material cause and effect before they leave home for college, they might just reject the primary causes altogether and embrace a deistic or atheistic worldview. After all, who needs God if science can explain everything? If you have any children's books like the one he's talking about in your home, I suggest you get rid of them. This guy's basically saying, yeah, I know the Bible says this, that, and the other thing about the circular flat earth set on pillars under a dome within which the sun, moon, and stars were placed on day 4, but we're going to have to look beyond the firmament. I'm going, ooh. And in chapter 5, he says, church history didn't wait too long before providing us with many colorful examples of what can happen when Christians take the creation science approach to biblical interpretation. The science of astronomy was advancing rapidly in Greek culture. New discoveries were challenging the church's acceptance of the ancient cosmogony. In every case, some in the church answered these challenges by combing through the scriptures to find support for a scientific view that would eventually crumble under the weight of opposing physical evidence. Every time this happened, Christians were forced to retreat. Their influence was weakened and their authority was diminished. These early controversies between Christianity and science clearly demonstrate the futility of trying to piece together a scientific description of the physical universe using the scriptures. And I mean, basically throughout this whole book, and I do recommend you read it, but it's a very frustrating book if you started to embrace essentially the biblical cosmology. And he's just basically making up excuses for the Bible, taking a similar approach to what Dr. Michael Heiser and many others are taking right now, and saying, look, the Bible is not about science, the Bible is about theological messaging, so we shouldn't allow the Bible to be held under the standard of science. It wasn't intended for that. And I just got real frustrated by all this. I wrote a post on Facebook on August 4th, so about a week ago. I said, upon further study, I feel I must issue the following warning. There can simply be no question, despite all the horribly lame attempts some have been trying to make recently to say otherwise, that the Hebrews shared the exact same cosmological worldview as their ancient Near Eastern neighbors. If you think otherwise, you are only telegraphing how little you know about history and how terrible you are at actually researching what the ancients wrote and believed. That being said, here's the warning. Dear literal Bible-believing young earth creationist, you either accept all of the creation account as given in Genesis and elaborated on by the likes of Job, who actually predates Moses, David, Solomon, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Yeshua, Peter, Paul, and John, among others, or you must throw the whole thing in the garbage bin of mythological fairy tales and nonsense written by the likes of other ignorant, primitive sheep herders, farmers, and fishermen from antiquity. You simply cannot believe in the literal 6-day creation account without also acknowledging the order of events given, such as the earth being the central character in the cosmos, not the sun nor the universe. You cannot ignore the fact that the sun, moon, and stars showed up on day 4 and that they were placed inside the firmament, which is described throughout the biblical narrative as well as in numerous ancient cultures as a hard physical structure that is connected to the circle of the earth. You cannot maintain any notion of the earth moving, spinning, orbiting, etc., as no biblical text supports such an idea. Rather, we find numerous examples of the Holy Spirit-inspired authors describing the sun on a circuit and the moon and stars likewise in motion. If you continue to claim to, quote-unquote, take the Bible literally and yet deny what it says, then you are a liar, plain and simple. Or worse yet, you are calling Yahuwah and his authors liars because none of them held to the belief system you do of a spinning heliocentric globular earth hurling through the endless expanse of space, being yanked along by the sun's quote-unquote gravity. Such a concept didn't even begin to take root in the minds of men until the pagan sun god worshipping Greeks began to fantasize about such things about 250 years before Christ. Now, the totally pagan Greek god-worshipping organization known as NASA has taken up the cause of perpetuating such a belief. And most of you, quote-unquote, creationists are only parroting what NASA feeds you as if it was the truth. You've exchanged the truth of Scripture for the quote-unquote truth as given to us from NASA and are now grossly mangling the biblical text to try and force it to fit what NASA has told you to believe. If you try to relegate the clear descriptions of the cosmos as being figurative and symbolic poetry, then you must also drag the creation of Adam from dust into the same category because it is just as absurd as the rest of the creation account, especially in this quote-unquote scientific worldview we tend to associate ourselves with these days. The same with Eve's creation from Adam's side. Such things are just as ridiculous as a flat earth cosmology because we all know that's not how men and women really come into this world. They don't come from dust, and women aren't pulled from the side of men. And while you're at it, clearly snakes don't talk, so the fall of man must simply be allegorical too. And if it is, then the concept of original sin is utter mythological nonsense too. And if that be the case, what need do we have of a miracle-working Savior born of a virgin? A miracle is something that generally contradicts what we know to be true in the natural. So are all the miracles in the Bible now allegorical, figurative poetry too? Did Lot's wife really turn into a pillar of salt? Did Moses really part the Red Sea? I mean, we know donkeys don't talk. So the story of Balaam's donkey talking must be poetic nonsense. Fire burns people, so we can't possibly accept the story of 3 Hebrews surviving inside a fiery furnace. Therefore, it must be a good moral tale to teach our children, kind of like Santa Claus, right? We know that people cannot walk on water, so the act of Jesus and Peter doing so must simply be a parable for us to figure out. And speaking of Peter, since when can a shadow heal people? Yet we are told that his did. It's probably just more poetic nonsense, right? And on it goes. You enter an extremely slippery slope by assigning those things you don't understand to the category of poetry and or merely figurative and allegorical language. Indeed, the more you read the various descriptions of the creation account and the subsequent stories of the Bible with the mindset of allegory and poetry, the less meaningful it becomes. The whole thing is then subject to our willingness to either accept what it says at face value or to dismiss it altogether because we claim to know such and such to be true. In such a completely subjective scenario, what then is truth, and can the Bible even offer anything remotely close to it in a science, falsely so-called, dominated worldview? So, with that as an introduction, I am very excited to bring on Zen Garcia back to the Revolutionary Radio Project. He's been on here before, so there's no need to go through his introduction again. He also has a show here on Truth Frequency Radio. So we're going to be talking about his new book that he messaged me, I think it was yesterday or maybe it was this morning. He says, "Hey, Rob, I got a new book that just put out called The Firmament, Vaulted Dome of the Earth." I'm going, wow, what a coincidence, as I've been doing a lot of study on that myself and reading this book, Beyond the Firmament. So with that said, Zen, are you there, sir?
I am, brother, and thanks for inviting me on again. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your listening audience. I've got just mad respect for you and all the work that you do, and going up there to Chicago and proving, without a shadow of a doubt that the skyline is not an illusion, not a mirage, and not some trick of the eye. Yeah, mad respect for you and all that you're doing, and very much looking forward to the book that you're going to put out, or the several books that you'll end up putting out on the testing the globe. And I know that your listening audience and those that follow your work, which are many, are also looking forward to that as well.
Oh, thanks, bro. Yeah, man, that Chicago trip, I put out that 30-minute highlight video, but there's so much more to it, both what led up to it, what went on behind the scenes during it, and what happened afterwards, that I commented to you earlier. I said, if I didn't commit to the biblical cosmology, I felt like I'd be hit by lightning or something. I know God doesn't work that way, but that's just kind of the way I felt, that the evidence was becoming so overwhelming for me that it's like, okay, I got to address this. Now, meanwhile, my friend and partner on Quest for Truth, Doug Hamp, puts out a video, and he's definitely not on board with any of this stuff. And in his video, and in another video that he did, he was talking about the firmament, and he was making the case that the firmament can be read or understood to simply be an expanse. And I'm like, yeah, dude, sorry. I mean, when you look through the numerous descriptions, yes, it is expansive in the sense that it was spread out, and it is very large.
Right.
But clearly, it is hard. And what solidified, if I can use that pun, to this whole idea, what solidified the fact that it was hard was when I looked at the Greek Septuagint, and the word that they use, I think it's stereoma or stereo, something like that, stereoma, whatever it was. It means a hard structure. And so I called my friend Peter, who grew up in Greece. He speaks Greek fluently, and he usually doesn't know the context of whatever question I'm asking. And so he's kind of a blank slate, and I'll just call him up one day and say, "Hey, Peter, what does this mean?" And he, with no dog in the hunt, not knowing what the context of the argument that I'm waging, he'll just tell me. And his answer was, well, it's a firm structure. It's a hard structure. So, yeah. What would your response be, based on your research? And I'm excited about your book because I know that you like to look not only deeply into the scriptures, but you also like to look into extra biblical texts as well. What did you find?
Oh my goodness, I found so much information. I found so much information that I had to split off 8 chapters to make a whole nother book. And this one, as it is 456 pages long. And basically what I did is took all of the extra biblical and canonical material that I could find that had in the parallel account of Genesis, the first 4 days of creation. And then I broke them down by the days and then post them one after the other. And then when you look at all of that information all together, it absolutely affirms that, just like you said, that the firmament is not just an expanse, but that it is a solid structure. And then when you actually go to like BibleHub.com, which I love that website, and you look up Genesis 1:6 and look up all the parallel multiple biblical translations and the commentaries, it's without question. And then even looking up the word firm or firmar, which is where we get firm, the word rakia, it absolutely affirms it as being a solid structure. And then all of the, like you, in looking at the cosmology, all of that also affirms the firmament as being a solid, rigid, strong, impenetrable structure. And so I lay all of that out in this particular book, like the Chronicles of Jeremiah, the Book of Jubilees, the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, Flavius Josephus, all of these different accounts, the Cave of Treasures, because each one of these, when you go and you read them, they break down, just like Genesis, the first 7 days of creation, but they bring forth the story in a different perspective, a different angle, with different wording, different phraseology. And so when you read all of that material together, you get a lot of extra details and greater insight into the fullness of the story. And so I present all of those accounts. It's like, for instance, there's a book called the Complete Jewish Bible. And when you read that, just for Genesis 1:6, it says, God said, let there be a dome in the middle of the water. Yep. Let it divide the water from the water. God made the dome and divided the water under the dome from the water above the dome. That is how it was. And God called the dome sky. So there was evening and there was morning, a second day. And so putting all of these comparative accounts together, one after the other, and then having all of that build upon the other stories, it's just amazing to actually go into that much depth and that much research. And then also I include all of these, the Job, the molten looking glass, Amos 9:6, the vaulted dome of the earth, different passages like that, looking at those from these multiple biblical translations and the commentaries, and then going into in-depth analysis with the Strong's Concordance. It's undeniable. And I got great respect for your friend Doug, but if he really did the kind of research that I put forth in compiling this book, and if he read this and looked at all of this information, in my opinion, it's absolutely undeniable.
Yeah, well, I found that science today really is two things. It's theoretical science and it's philosophical science.
Right.
It's not zetetic science. And in the beginning of zetetic astronomy, Dr. Samuel Robotham describes the difference between theoretical science and zetetic science, where zetetic meaning you proceed with inquiry and investigation, you go out and you do practical physical tests where you actually do observation and make measurements and stuff like that, versus theoretical science, which is largely just done on a chalkboard with math, that you can make maths basically say almost anything you want it to say.
Right.
When you start with preconceived ideas, and then you try to make everything fit that idea, well, you're dealing with philosophical science, where you have a philosophy and you're trying to make the theoretical mathematics match your preconceived biases and stuff like that in your philosophy. So we're going to break here, and we'll pick up where we left off when we come back. And we're back on the Evolution Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and tonight I'm talking with my guest, Zen Garcia, about his new book, The Firmament, Vaulted Dome of the Earth. And right before the break, we were talking about the ancient texts and how the ancient texts are totally in agreement with the idea of this vaulted dome over the earth. But you've got people, well-meaning people like Doug Hamp and others who want to basically proceed with a preconceived notion that the current scientific worldview is correct. Therefore, you're going to use this philosophical approach where, okay, we know this to be true, we know the Bible to be true, therefore I'm going to have to twist, manipulate, and grossly distort the biblical text to try to fit the scientific worldview that we know, quote unquote, to be true. And that's one of the things that the author of Beyond the Firmament, Understanding Science and the Theology of Creation is warning against. Yet at the same time, this guy is totally on board with the modern scientific worldview. And when he gets to the part about the Israelites being taken out of Egypt, he's talking about, look, the entire ancient Near East had the same snow globe worldview. So did the Egyptians. The Israelites are pulled out of there. Moses is taken on top of a mountain with God. And here God has the opportunity to set the record straight. And in chapter 3, he asks the question, he says, but why did God just recycle the erroneous structural elements of the ancient Near Eastern cosmos and intentionally keep mankind ignorant of the scientific truth for thousands of years? These are all legitimate questions, or at least they should be. Try asking them at your church, and folks probably won't be too happy with you. In fact, you may end up at the top of somebody's prayer list. But I don't know what else to tell you. You can pull out your Bible and follow along if you want. The second sentence of the biblical account starts off with the same formless, watery abyss as the pagan versions do. Now think about that for a minute. Genesis 1:2 makes a reference to the surface of the deep, but no explanation is provided for this primordial structure. What surface of what deep? There are no footnotes or references, and there is no preface to explain what this watery abyss is all about. Why is that? Quite simply, it wasn't necessary. The Hebrews had just spent over 200 years in Egypt. They would have all known exactly where Moses was going with this. And just like the Egyptian accounts, God brings order out of the primordial chaos by a series of separations. He separates light from darkness and calls them day and night. He separates dry land from water and calls them land and sea. This all seems like a strong indication that the construction of the ancient Near Eastern universe was also the framework for the Hebrew creation. But in my mind, the biblical firmament is the smoking gun. What am I talking about? Here we have a very literal description of something that was thought to physically exist in the ancient world. The dome that was above the ancient sky was a material entity, not figurative or metaphorical or something else. It was a solid structure capable of supporting the ocean above it. But rather than correct this common misunderstanding that the sky holds back an ocean of water above the heavens from which it rains through tiny windows, God creates this strange thing called a firmament to separate the waters above the earth from the waters below the earth, thus dividing the waters from the waters. Here we clearly see God intentionally repeating the same structural inaccuracies of the pagan cosmogonies. And so what this guy basically says is that God's whole purpose in theological messaging, and this is a doctrine that you hear a lot of people like Dr. Michael Heiser and others subscribing to, called accommodation, where, okay, this is what they all believe, but rather than mess up everything they all believe, we'll basically say, yeah, here's all the same exact things that the Egyptians believed and that the Mesopotamians and Babylonians and Sumerians and everybody else believed, except let's just replace the names of all the gods that did all that with my name, Yahuwah. So I'm the one that did it, but I basically did it the same way. I mean, it's absurd because then you turn God into a liar, and if this whole accommodation thing is true, Scripture says, is God a man that he should lie? Well, you just turned God into a liar if we believe that the Holy Spirit inspired the authors of Scripture. And I'm sorry, I can't accept that. The fact that he gave Moses, he had the opportunity to set the record straight. And, okay, so he replaced the names of Anu and all these other gods with his name because he's the one that did it. But he didn't change the basic mechanism of a circular, still flat earth set on pillars under a dome within which the sun, moon, and stars are placed. So I don't know what else to do except say the Bible must be true. And
absolutely,
you've said that, and you've looked into these other books. Let's talk about some of these other books because I'll take them as confirming witness. Probably most people would be more familiar with the works of Josephus. So what did you find that Josephus had to say regarding the creation account?
Okay, I'll bring that up, but I want to just mention this really quick since you talked about Moses and the Israelites when they received the law. He and the 70 elders were given a vision of the Most High God. And and they saw him. It says in Exodus 24:10 that they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and as it were, the body of heaven in his clearness. Well, I break down all of these passages, even like with Revelation 4 and 15, where John describes God and sitting on his throne, and that his throne is established on a sea of glass like unto crystal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all of these images and visions and conceptualizations, when you understand what is being described and alluded to, because the real key is Isaiah 14, when Lucifer says that he wants to exalt his throne above the stars of God, above the clouds of God, and that is God's throne is located over the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. Well, when you understand that the north is the North Pole and that all of the other directions come together in the very center of the dome, that's exactly where the Most High God has established his heavenly temple and his throne. And so when you look up and you see Polaris, and it's the only fixed star of the celestial night, and all of the other heavenly luminaries, including the sun and the moon, move in circle around it, well, God's throne is established exactly above Polaris, because that is the sides of the north. Mm-hmm. And the mount of the congregation is in, well, I can elaborate on that in just a little bit, but let me go ahead and read a passage from Flavius Josephus about the firmament, and looking at all of these different accounts of what they say about the firmament is absolutely fascinating. But he says this: after this, on the second day, he placed the heaven over the whole world. And so this kind of also fits into, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, where he was able to see a tree, and then you were able to see it from the ends of the earth. Same thing with Yeshua being shown all of the kingdoms of the world. It's the whole world, and the heavens are above it. And as in Ecclesiastes, Solomon describes with 29 verses all things under the sun, in which, according to the heliocentric worldview, there's no way that the sun ever comes above the earth or any of the other planets. It's always to the side of it, because according to that worldview, all of the planets are held by its gravitational attraction, and they are always spinning to the side of it. And so it can never assert an orientation where the sun is above, as it says in Ecclesiastes, under the sun. And so here he says, he placed the heavens over the whole world and separated from the other parts, and he determined it should stand by itself. He also placed a crystalline firmament round it, and put it together in a manner agreeable to the earth, and fitted it for giving moisture and rain, and for avoiding the advantage of dews. Let me say one other thing before we go into some of these other verses on the firmament, that all of these individuals that deny the scriptures and want to try to accommodate, as you say, what God describes in Genesis and the timeline of Genesis, the first 4 days of creation, the earth being inscribed as a circle established on pillars, the firmament being spread above and fitted to it, the dry land being risen and brought up from the waters of the deep, and then on the fourth day, the heavenly luminaries being created and placed into the firmament of the earth. Denying all of that, all you have to do is bring up, whenever you're having a conversation or a debate with somebody, is the scientific evidence actually affirms that the earth is not moving. Mm-hmm. And that these different heliocentricists back in the 1800s, in trying to measure and detect the rate of the velocity of the Earth's axial motion, actually failed to detect any motion at all. and their experiments are now actually confirmation that the Earth is not moving in any manner at any rate of speed, which is exactly what the biblical narrative asserts in very many passages, that the Earth is stationary, fixed, and unmoving. And so no matter what you think about the shape of the Earth, whether you believe it's a ball or flat or whatever, it is most certainly not moving. And as you affirmed in going to Chicago and actually taking a trip out there to prove that Chicago is not a mirage, and that what you see across the lake actually is, and that you can actually drive out to it in a boat, that proves that there is no curvature as well. And so taking those two facts, scientific facts, that there's no curvature and that the Earth is not moving, well, their whole belief system on the heliocentric worldview collapses. And so they have to and are forced to reassess what they believe. And the fact that they ignore and deny that, I mean, then you have to take into account all of the things that are affirmed by the scriptures, and you have to reassess all of these things together to formulate a different worldview. And, I know that they are afraid to let go and are afraid to actually look at the evidence and to embrace it. But, it is what it is. Truth is what it is. The scriptures affirm that truth. They give us description as to how the Most High God established the creation. And we can't you can, but if you really want to accept the gospel for what it is, you have to embrace it in the way that it was laid out, written, and given to the prophets, and as it came down to us.
Yeah, while I was doing that Lake Michigan test, the next day we went out and we interviewed some people, some other boat captains and stuff. And, I just wanted to get people who have been on the lake, most of their life, that's what they do for a living, get their take on what they've seen while they're out there. And we interviewed this one guy, and he went on and on about how sometimes you can see the city, sometimes you can't, but it's all due to refraction and how light bends over the curve. And because you do, to be fair, you do lose the lower part of the city, and you do lose the lower parts of ships. But it's a really bizarre thing, because when you start pointing out how all that works with perspective and with mirages and different things like that, on the one hand, the ball earthers will say, well, the Earth is so big, it's just so massive,
right,
huge, that you can't detect the horizontal, i.e. the x-axis. You can't detect the x-axis. But wait a minute. You can detect the z-axis. You can see ships disappear in 4 miles, allegedly, and entire cities in less than 40 miles, supposedly. So you can't have both. You can't say the Earth is so big that you just can't see the curvature, while at the same time saying that cities are being hit by the curve and ships are disappearing over it. If you're seeing them go on the z-axis over an alleged ball, then if there's a guy off to your left, let's say, and he's saying the same thing, we're on the east of Lake Michigan, looking to the west towards Chicago. So if you're standing on that beach and you say you see ships disappear in about 4 miles over the alleged curve, and somebody's at the southern tip of Lake Michigan looking to the north, and he's saying the same thing, well, I'm seeing ships disappear 4 miles, distant. Well, then if the guy at the southern end is looking toward the north and seeing ships roll over the curve, that should be perceived by you on the east.
Right. You
should have a horizontal x-axis curvature. But the ballers will drive themselves crazy trying to justify the Earth being so big that you can't detect the curve, while at the same time claiming that cities can be obscured by it. So clearly there's something else causing the lower parts of cities and the lower parts of boats to be disappearing. But circling back around to what the biblical text says, I want to address a few things here that you talked about. The thing that got me, Zen, was going back and trying not to use my preconceived notions, using a philosophical approach. Just say, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put all my preconceived biases aside, because I have the same cognitive dissonance everybody else has. I'm just going to read the text. And I didn't get far in Genesis 1, and it tells you point blank, sun, moon, and stars are in the firmament, inside the thing. So all of a sudden, what I used to preach myself as recently as December 2014, this idea that Carl Baugh and Kent Hovind and others talk about of the firmament being an ice canopy surrounding the Earth before the flood, it just doesn't work.
Right. And then the whole thing with, the way that they affirm planetary accretion, that all of the planets, gathering up the dust from the solar plane, that they coalesced into being planets, and then, the being held in and bound by the gravitation of the sun as a central mass, that in that spinning, that's what created the axial motion as well as the orbital motion. Well, how does that work when the sun wasn't even in existence until the fourth day?
Right. If you're going to go with science, dear Christian out there listening, if you're going to take a quote-unquote scientific worldview, you got to throw Genesis out and any other biblical text that describes the creation of the world, because it is not in any way in agreement. And so if you're going to say the Earth is spinning and it's heliocentric, like my friend Doug Camp wants to say, and others, and Dr. Michael Heiser too, it doesn't work. The creation account, I mean, you got to turn the whole thing into poetry, really.
Exactly. And as I did in this book, because, in learning that NASA and the things that they had brought forth and trying to hoax with the Apollo 11 missions, that the Earth was a sphere, and then also learning that there's no curvature and that the Earth is not in any way moving, according to the real, verifiable, repeatable scientific experiments that anybody, well, not anybody, but those that have the ability and capacity to do can repeat even today. Well, that forced me to have to look at all of the biblical texts, and specifically the Genesis narrative. And as I said, in the 4th chapter of my book, I break down in the first 4 days of creation with Genesis, the complete Jewish Bible, the Aramaic Targum, the Book of Jubilees, the Cave of Treasures, the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, the Book of the Bee, the Chronicles of Jeremiah, and Flavius Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews. And all of these accounts, when you read them all side by side, one on top of the other, in parallel comparative study of each one of these days, as I said, you get so much more information and you gain much more insight into what exactly occurred on those particular days. And as you said, even just with what we talked about, the sun not being created until the 4th day and being placed into the Earth's firmament, which was fitted to it, means that it is in no way larger than the Earth, but has to be very much smaller in order to hold a circuit within that firmament. And so the Earth has to be a very much larger proportion, which that completely throws off the whole heliocentric worldview as well.
And the ever-expanding universe where we're just...
Exactly, yeah.
Carl Sagan's pale blue dot in a backwater galaxy and,
right.
All that. Now, you mentioned it's fitted to the Earth, and that was something that struck me as I was just going through the biblical text, that whenever the Earth is shaking, in many places where we read in an apocalyptic sense that God's going to shake the Earth up, he also talks about the foundations of heaven being shaken at the same time.
Right.
And that only makes sense if we're talking about heaven as a firm structure attached to the Earth,
right,
such that the motion of one affects the other.
Right. And it actually, in the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, it talks about the creation of the firmament as a heavenly circle, and also being attached to the outer ends where the sea is given boundaries, which is a fascinating passage, and I can read that, but let me read this really quick from the Cave of Treasures, the creation on the 2nd day. It says, "And on the 2nd day God made the lower heaven and called it Rakia, that is to say, what is solid and fixed," or firmament.
Wow.
This he did that he might make known that the lower heaven doth not possess the nature of the heaven which is above it, and that it is different in appearance from the heaven which is above it, for the heaven above it is of fire. And there's a lot more commentary in each one of these passages, but I'll move to the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, because this is a fascinating, absolutely fascinating passage. It says, "And then I made firm the heavenly circle, and made that the lower water which is under heaven collect itself together into one whole, and that the chaos become dry, and it became so. Out of the waves I created rock, hard and big, and from the rock I piled up earth, and I called the abyss, that is to say, the bottomless. I collected the sea in one place and bound it together with a yoke. And I said to the sea, Behold, I give thee thy eternal limits, and thou shalt not break loose from thy component parts. Thus I made fast the firmament, and this day I called the first created." Now in the next portion, he actually describes even greater detail. And when we actually get back from break, this upcoming break, I'll have that passage ready. But he describes the first and second heaven as being 7 in number, and then he describes there being, just like the Sefer Yetzirah, it describes the 5 planets: Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, and then the sun and the moon. Those are also counted as planets. And so in the Sefer Yetzirah, it calls them the 7 planets of the universe. And just like with the naming of the days of the week, all of those days take their names from the heavenly luminaries, the celestial luminaries, but the earth is not included as being one of these luminaries. It is counted as being completely different, which is why the earth is not included in the naming of the 7 days of the week, nor is it counted as one of these 7 planets of the universe as it cites in the Sefer Yetzirah.
Yeah. Now, this one of the. I'm sure you hear this argument all the time. People say, "Well, I've looked through a telescope and I can see the planets and I can see the moon and the sun and everything. They're all spherical. So we must be spherical too." I'm like, well, that's like looking at a whole bunch of tennis balls on a tennis court and demanding that the court be the same shape as the tennis balls. Clearly, those other bodies are above us for the purpose of doing things that revealing things to us here on this circular plane. I mean, that's what it says. It says that he created 2 great lights, not one great light and a reflective rock, by the way. Have you been seeing some of the work they did on, I think it was on Globebusters? This guy, I think his name was Bob, maybe? He was using, I think it was called Celestine rock. And he was showing that this particular rock has the properties that it absorbs light and emanates light, sort of like the glow, like glow in the dark toys or whatnot. Yeah. And he was showing how one of those like Tesla coil balls you can get like at Spencer that has the lightning inside of it, and you touch the globe and the goes to your hand, and you take a fluorescent bulb and you bring this fluorescent bulb. You're not plugged into anything, just the bulb. Grab a bulb and put it near the globe, the Tesla globe thing, and the fluorescent light lights up by itself. And where Enoch in the section of the heavenly luminaries is talking about the sun pours its light into the moon. Right. It doesn't say it reflects. The moon reflects the light. It means it's pulling energy from the sun and illuminating itself at the second great light.
Yeah, that's a fascinating passage, and that's what I wrote about that, because in my 9th book I break down all of the passage and all of the chapters of the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries in the Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch. But I talked about that in that particular book because the moon, it has to be converting the light in some way and then emitting its own light, because its light has different properties than that of the sun. So that to me asserts that it is in no way reflecting it, but if it is absorbing and transmuting it, it certainly has its own light, and it is the properties of the light is completely different, as you showed in your experiment with the temperatures.
All right, talk about that with the back.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
The wicked ones, obviously under heavy Masonic influence.
We're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, for the second hour of the broadcast. Wow, this is time's really flying by tonight. Talking with my guest, Zen Garcia, about his new book, The Firmament, Vaulted Dome of the Earth. And right before the break, we were discussing some of the other texts, other than the canonized texts of the Bible, that describe the Earth very much like a snow globe. And we're talking about the book of Enoch. And I just want to say, I published a book called Genesis and the Synchronized Biblically Endorsed Biblical Text. I think it was back in 2013. And in the introduction of that book, I said that I was working on a highlighted and annotated, footnoted version of the book of Enoch. And I was, for quite some time, working on that, going through each chapter and making footnotes and stuff and giving commentary. And then I got sidetracked. And I put that book aside, and I dog-eared the page where I left off so I can get back to it again at another time. And then last year, I find myself doing all this flat earth research and stuff. And after a couple months of doing that and looking at the biblical text and seeing, wow, I mean, the Bible absolutely is a flat earth book, I thought to myself, I wonder if I went back and reread the book of Enoch with this mindset, because when you read Enoch with a spinning heliocentric ball mentality, a lot of the book of Enoch just doesn't make any sense at all. And so I thought, well, I'll go back and look at it again with this flat earth cosmology. And holy cow, I opened the book that I had dog-eared, where it was kind of a manuscript that I had printed off and put in a notebook, where I had left off with the footnotes. And wouldn't you know it, the last chapter that I left off reading was chapter 71. And when I looked at the next chapter, the title heading is The Book of the Courses of the Heavenly Luminaries. And I started laughing. I'm like, really, God? 2 years ago, I put this book aside, said I'll get back to it later. And that's where I pick up reading. And wow, what did you discover? Let's go back and tell us again the title of your previous book. I know we did a whole show on it before, but just kind of summarize a little bit about your previous book and how it relates to the book of Enoch and Flat Earth.
The Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch. And just like you said, I revisited those portions of the text because there are descriptions of the motions of the sun and the moon through the six gates of heaven that cannot be decrypted and made sense of when you go and try to read them and understand them with the heliocentric worldview. But in embracing the flat earth and opening myself to the possibility of it as model for world, when I revisited those portions of the text, I was able to understand all of them. And that's when I decided, because I was working on 2 different other books at the time, and I pushed those aside and decided to write that particular book. And it was actually the fastest book I ever wrote. I put it out in 6 months, and it helps to explain what nobody in the last 500 years has been able to make sense of according to that portion of the text. And it's because we are trying to decrypt the motions for the sun, the moon, and the celestial luminaries according to by applying it to a globe or a sphere, and you cannot make sense of it. And so as I explained in that book, you have to apply those motions to the earth as if you're looking down on it from above, as if the earth is a clock's face, as laid out by the azimuthal equidistant projection map, as they show on the United Nations flag. And I can actually, because I want to bring out something really relevant to what we're talking about, and that at the end of this, it will bring us back to what we're talking about with the motions of the sun and the moon, because he describes them in a circular orientation. And when you try to understand how Enoch describes this movement, because the 6 gates of heaven are laid out between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. But when you look down upon the earth as if it's a globe, those motions and those movements are then correspondingly on the side, because that's where the equator would be, is on the side of the globe if you're looking down upon it from the North Pole. And so you can't make sense or even see the motions that Enoch is describing. But when you place and apply those motions to the azimuthal equidistant projection map and looking down upon it as if you're placed, as if you're right where Polaris is and looking down on the full circle of the earth from above, as described in Isaiah, then you can make sense of all of these. And so all of those motions. And so I decrypted all of that information and released it for new consideration, because as long as you believe in the globe earth and that the earth is a ball or a sphere, you will not be able to understand those portions of the text.
Well said. I mean, you like you said, for 500 years,
right,
the ancient cosmological worldview in which the Book of Enoch was written has been completely discarded. So kudos to you, man, for bringing that cosmological worldview back to the Book of Enoch, because that's the context in which it was written, which makes it make a whole lot more sense. And like you said, we're talking about a clock face. And
right.
Everything is for times and seasons. That's what it's
Yes, exactly.
For times and seasons. So it is a clock face, which reminds me of something else, too. The word face.
Right.
The face of the earth. You can't use that terminology for a globe. There's
exactly.
Face on a globe. Especially if you look up the definition of face and what a face is, what a face represents. However, the face of a clock is perfectly applicable to the face of the earth concept as a disk, And you mentioned as viewed from Polaris. Do you believe then, and I've actually wondered about this even when I believed in the spinning heliocentric globe, do you believe that Polaris is basically the primary window of heaven just below the throne of God, from which he looks down and sees us as grasshoppers?
Absolutely. I believe it's the portal towards the... And in Enoch chapter 14, I believe he actually describes going through this portal when he goes up to the... and I described this in this particular new book as well. But yes, that is the doorway to God's throne, to the heavenly temple that he is situated, because that is the center of the vaulted dome of the earth. That is the sides of the north. And it is above the Mount of Congregation, which is a whole another topic that we can talk about. But yeah, all of that, the North Pole, the Polaris being directly over the North Pole, it is showing you exactly where the center of the vaulted dome of the earth is. And that is exactly where God's throne and the heavenly temple is located.
Now, I'm just thinking out loud here. This is something I've been kind of mulling over recently, is the idea that the dome is just the upper hemisphere that's over the top of the earth. Do you believe that there is an inverse of that under the earth, that basically we are in a sphere that is the firmament with a circular plate going across the equator, as it were, and an underworld that is sort of a inverse of the upper world? And if that's true, then do you think that if Polaris is the opening to the expanse of heaven that presumably has no end, then that there might be an opening on the bottom hemisphere of the vaulted dome.
The great abyss.
That would be the bottomless pit. Just the
yes,
the inverse.
It is the great abyss. Yes, but whether it is a sphere like the firmament, I don't know. But it does describe. There are many texts that describe that not only are there 7 layers to the windows of heaven, and 7 heavens dividing the first and the second heaven below what is the height of heights, the heaven of heavens, which is above the vaulted dome of the earth. Again, that's where these 7 planetary, not planetary, but the 7 planets of the universe, the 5 planets and the sun and the moon, they have circuit on each one of these 7 layers of heaven. But there are also descriptions of there being 7 foundation great fountains of the earth as well, and they are numbered exactly like that in the book of Jubilees
and
as well.
It's of Hades too, throughout multiple cultures. The Greeks, most notably the Sumerians, talked about the 7 gates of Hades and the entries that guard them. So it does appear that there's the inverse mirror, underneath of what is above.
Exactly, yes. And the earth is the central plane where the heavens and hell meet together. We are the middle plane where both meet together.
Yeah. Now, did you cover anything in your most recent book about the concept of Mount Meru?
Yes, I did. And in fact, the 8 chapters that I had to split off go into great detail about that. Because as I said, the Mount of the Congregation is Mount Meru, is Mount Olympus, is what is called Rupus Negra, which when we get to the next portion, I'll pull up all of that so I can elaborate on that a little bit further. But let me go ahead and I want to elaborate just a little bit on the firmament where it joins together with the ends of the earth, because I told you about that it describes this in the book of the Secrets of Enoch.
Yeah.
But I want to read this other passage really quick from the Cave of Treasures, because it describes the stars, how they were created. It says this, and as soon as the heat of the sun was diffused over the surface of the earth became hard and rigid and lost its flaccidity, because the humidity and the dampness caused by the waters were taken away from it. The Creator made the sphere of the sun of fire and filled it with light. And God gave unto the sphere the moon and the stars bodies of water and air, and filled them with light. The path of the luminaries is beneath the firmament. They are not fixed as the ignorant think, but are guided in their courses by the angels. Mm-hmm. And so there's no mention of they're having physical earth-like form or terraform. They are water and air. They're filled with light. They're luminaries. The earth is something completely different.
So is that sonoluminescence that we're talking about regarding the stars then?
Yes, and that's the luminescence, because they are made from bodies of water and air, but then they are filled with light, and that's what gives them their luminescence, and that's what makes them particularly luminaries.
Now, the Book of Enoch describes a class of angels known as the heavenly luminaries, and Scripture over and over and over again interchangeably uses the word angel with stars, stars with angels. So do you think that these are sentient beings?
I do, absolutely. And just like with what it said, their courses are not fixed, meaning that they have to have intelligence in order to maintain their circuits, which is why they, the class of stars that refuse to come forth at their appointed time, they had intelligence to refuse to do so. And the sun, even the sun, it has to change its circuit every day, because it's moving back and forth every day. It's shortening or lengthening its course as it moves back and forth between these 6 gates of heaven. And one day, its circuit equalizing to 24 hours in a day, it is either shorter or longer the very next day. It is never the same. It's not just out there, just doing its thing. It has intelligence in order to speed up or slow down to maintain its circuit with one 24-hour period.
Yeah, and we see that God calls them by name.
Yes.
He has names for them. He has instructions given to them that they are to keep a path. And that's why, when people say, well, what about the spinning of the stars in the so-called northern hemisphere versus the spinning of the stars in the southern hemisphere? Well, that was totally resolved for me when I realized that canonically speaking, biblically speaking, the canonized text describes them as sentient beings, as angels. Enoch does the same thing and says there's a heavenly police officer named Raguel that polices these guys and makes sure that they stay on path. Then basically it seems to me that they are marching in essentially a figure 8 pattern, and that's not a deal breaker anymore. I mean, that used to be one of the ones that kept me, one of the proofs of the spinning heliocentric ball that had kept me from embracing anything to do with the flat enclosed dome world, until I realized, well, these are sentient beings just marching on a path.
Right. Yeah, and the analema, I think, is what it's called.
It's a figure 8.
Yeah, and it shows the motions, the movements. All right, this is going to blow your mind, because this is something that I discovered in the book of the Secrets of Enoch, which confirms something that Samuel Robotham spoke about. So it says this, and it's describing the 7 breakdown, the 7 circles of the firmament. On the first uppermost circle, I placed the stars, Chrono, which that's Kronos, Saturn. And on the second, Aphrodite, which is Venus. On the third, Eris, which is Mars. On the 5th, Zeus, which is Jupiter. And on the 6th, Hermes. On the 7th, Lesser the moon, and adorned it with the lesser stars. And on the lower I placed the sun for the illumination of day, and the moon and the stars for the illumination of night. Now, I didn't catch this for the longest time, but it says on the 7th, lesser the moon. What is lesser the moon? Could Enoch actually be describing the lesser moon here?
Oh.
And yeah, very interesting. Right, exactly. Now, take that into account with this passage.
Wow.
I wrote this, and this passage from 2 Enoch is one of the more cryptic passages from that text, which as passage describes the planets as stars, grouping them together with the sun, moon, stars, and did you notice, lesser the moon? What in the world could Enoch be citing by this reference? Did he perhaps actually mean the lesser moon? And if so, is this the object which Samuel Bertheley Robotham wrote about in chapter 11 of his masterful work, Zetetic Astronomy, Earth Not a Globe, when discussing the causes of solar and lunar eclipses? There, he speculates upon the existence of some unnoticed, unknown, dark companion to the moon, which as body, he postulates could possibly be the object responsible for casting shadow upon and across the luminescent face during lunar eclipses. In that chapter, he also shares eyewitness record of the unfolding of certain lunar eclipses where both moon and sun remain positioned above the Earth's horizon, negating possibility that it was the shadow of the Earth which obstructed sight of the moon during such viewing, also negating it as the cause of such happening. And here's the passage from his book. A solar eclipse is the result simply of the moon passing between the sun and the observer on Earth. But that an eclipse of the moon arises from a shadow of the Earth is a statement in every respect because unproved, unsatisfactory. The Earth has been proved to be without orbital or axial motion, and therefore it could never come between the sun and the moon. The Earth is also proved to be a plane always underneath the sun and moon, and therefore to speak of its intercepting the light of the sun and thus casting its own shadow on the moon is to say that which is physically impossible. Besides the above difficulties of incompatibilities, many cases are on record of the sun and the moon being eclipsed when both were above the horizon. The sun, the earth, and the moon, not in a straight line, but the earth below the sun and the moon, out of the reach of or direction of both, and yet a lunar eclipse has occurred? Is it possible that a shadow of the earth could be thrown upon the moon when sun, earth, and moon were not in the same line? From the facts and phenomena already advanced, we cannot draw any other conclusion than that the moon is obscured by some kind of semi-transparent body passing before it, and through which the luminous surface is visible, the luminosity changing in color by the density of the intervening object. This conclusion is forced upon us by the evidence, but it involves the admission that the moon shines with light of its own, that it is not a reflector of the sun's light, but absolutely self-luminous, and although this admission is logically compulsory, it will be useful and strictly zetetic to collect all the evidence possible which bears upon it. And so, yeah, I think Enoch was actually talking about this dark, luminous, semi-transparent body that Samuel Robothon wrote about in postulating what actually casts its shadow on the lunar face during lunar eclipse.
That's fantastic. Yeah, when I was questioning issues of the moon, I started questioning all that because of watching the last of the tetrads, the 4 blood red moons that were on the feast days. I was on the roof of the parking garage of my building the night that happened, and I saw the moon pop up before the sun went down. And from the parking garage, I was looking directly east at the rising moon as the sun went down 20 or 30 minutes, something like that, 40 minutes after the moon had come up. So the sun goes down behind me and the moon's in front of me. And about 40 minutes later, the moon's going into a blood red lunar eclipse. But the way the dynamics of where I was and what I was looking at, the way everything was lined up, it didn't make any sense at all, because if the sun is going down directly behind me and the earth is supposedly what causes the shadow and the moon is directly in front of me, then when the sun went down behind me, the shadow of the earth should have come up from the bottom of the moon upward. But it came from the north and kind of the top of the moon. I'm going, what? That doesn't make any sense at all. And that's when I started looking for other explanations. And I'd already read that in Zetetic Astronomy. And then I stumbled across some Hindu writings that they called Rahu and Ketu, these 2 dark orbs that are supposedly in our sky.
That's interesting.
Yeah, look into Rahu and Ketu. You can see that. And did you see the recent report that came out? You can go on YouTube and search for WSO Urgent. Huge eclipse on SDO shows huge planet/object. Now, these guys' commentary, they're spinning heliocentrists, but they were looking at the Soho live, supposedly the live pictures of the satellite views of the sun, allegedly. Mm-hmm. There's this large dark orb eclipsing the sun. Now, later, and it was semi-transparent too. You could see through it.
Oh, wow.
I posted this. If you go on my timeline on my Facebook to August 2nd, I posted it on August 2nd. You can watch that video.
All right. Hi, everybody. It's Steve Olson and Wayne. We've got a breaking report. We want everybody to get a chance to see this while it's still happening, so I'm going to try to put up a short 2-minute video quick. Wayne, what we're seeing here appears to be an eclipse in the 94 angstroms up to all the way to the top of the angstrom list here.
Yes, that's correct.
Tell me how you came across this, Wayne. I
want to give credit to one of our subscribers. Jake Riley Sr. sent me a heads up, a real big heads up about an hour ago. He started catching this when it first started about an hour ago. And Steve, that's when I finally got a hold of you. And here we are now. And you and I have watched this increase.
Correct. In fact, I'll show you here the picture when you first got to me. This is the picture, and I'll get the similar one up here. But I got this. What would this be? About 20 minutes ago. This is the picture 20 minutes ago.
Yes, sir.
And I'll go find 304. Let's do 211. and then compare.
There it is.
That it has advanced. It is an eclipsing object of the sun. There's no question. It's either something round got in front of the camera that looks like a planet, like some scientist at NASA is just messing with us with a little occulting disc. Either that or it's a planet. One or the other.
Well, or lens flare.
It's a big black lens flare.
For the record, everyone, my position is that this is a lens flare. My expert visual skills show me, Steve. Listen, if it's not something that they're doing,
wait, look at this.
Look
how
at that.
It almost looks like it's transparent.
It does. Wow. Now,
doesn't this remind you of the orb that we saw, or the orb reaction that we saw with Venus yesterday, Wayne?
Yeah, well, I've gotten my self pounded on that one, that is just merely a lens flare. But you're right, Steve. This I did not notice. Good catch.
Yeah, look at that. This is only in the 94 angstroms.
Now later they put out another video, the same guys saying they think that it might have been the moon. But regardless, people could go online and just Google dark orb plasma sun. You can do a Google search for something like that, and you'll see pictures, and they'll say stuff like, Jupiter-sized Death Star-like orb sucking plasma from the sun. You'll find articles and stuff like that where spinning heliocentric globe Earth people have acknowledged that there are dark orbs in our system. And they talk about dark matter. They talk about, dwarf stars. And, they already have a concept of dark objects moving through our space. So if you can accept that in the spinning heliocentric globe model, why not in the firmament? Especially when you got text like this telling you point blank. There's something
right
out here.
Exactly. Yeah, it's fascinating. And no, I've been totally disconnected from most, everybody else's work because I've been so consumed on studying all of this material so that I could publish this particular book. But yeah, I need to. And now that I'm actually done, I'm going to take the time to do some of that. But I've been out of the loop. My co-host, Kathy, thank God for her. She's been really keeping me in line with some of the happenings and, helping me to keep the shows interesting because I'm so just not with all of what's going on, but just so narrowly focused on all of this work that I've done with regard to this book. But I'm going to share just a couple other things real quick because you had talked about, and we were talking about the movement of the sun and the moon through the 6 gates of heaven. So I want to bring it back to that by the time we get to the next break. And I think I got just enough time to share this. It says this from the Sefer Yetzirah, which is the book of creation. Many of the ancients supposed that there were concentric spheres which were transparent but solid, and that these spheres revolved around the earth, carrying the heavenly bodies with them. In one of these spheres they supposed was the sun, in another the moon, in another the fixed stars, in another the planets, and it was the harmonious movement of these concentric and transparent orbs which it was supposed produced the music of the spheres. And so the Sefer Yetzirah is talking about the same thing that the book of Enoch, the book of the secrets of Enoch, which is Enoch number 2, speaks about as the firmament being established in these 7 heavens, these 7 heavenly circles, which is where the planets have their motion and are located and allocated to. And this also, in my opinion, because I no longer believe that any of these planets or any of these celestial luminaries are moving in orbit around the sun.
And we're back on the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, for the final half-hour segment of the broadcast. I'm talking with my guest, Zen Garcia. We're talking about his new book, The Firmament, Vaulted Dome of the Earth. And man, time's just flying by way too fast. Dude, I'm going to have you come on for a second show because I know we're barely scratching the surface of this topic.
Right, barely. Yeah.
I mean, you feel like an outline, and we barely even touched hardly any of it. Mm-hmm. But, right before the break, you were talking about the celestial bodies, so go ahead and continue where you left off there.
All right. What I'm about to go into now connects what we were talking about with the heavenly circle in heaven with the movement that I will go into that of my decrypting the Book of Enoch's the motion of the sun and the moon in a circular fashion over the earth as if it's laid out as a clock's face. But one passage before, which again affirms that the luminaries are completely different from the earth and that there's no other in our universe earth-like planets or objects or bodies that have actual terraform which can be inhabited, that these stars, the celestial stars that we see, all of the planets, the wandering stars, they're all luminaries, and they're described as such in the books of Enoch. It says this: on the fourth day, God made the luminaries, sun, moon, and stars of three substances, air, light, and fire. He took aerial material and prepared vessels like lamps, and mixed fire with light and filled them. And because in the nature of fire there was no light, nor heat in that of light, the fire imparted heat to the light, and the light gave luminosity to the fire. And from these two were the luminaries, sun, moon, and stars fabricated. Now, this has to do with the movement, the motions, which those that try to understand what I'm about to go into by applying these motions to the globe Earth, they won't make any sense. It says this: the path of the luminaries is beneath the firmament, and they are not fixed as men have foolishly stated, but the angels guide them. Mar Isaac says, the sun performs his course from the east to the west and goes behind the lofty northern mountains the whole night until he rises in the east. This is from the Book of the Bee. So remember this motion. From the east, that's where the sun rises. It goes to the west where the sun sets, and then back towards the north. Well, how does that work if you're on a globe and the earth spinning is what causes the sun, which is in the very center of the so-called solar system, that it's the earth spinning which causes it to set and to rise? How does it go from east to west and then back to the north? Doesn't make sense. And a few more passages and then I'll explain this. This is from the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, chapter 24, verse 4. For before all things were visible, I alone used to go about in the invisible things like the sun, from east to west and then from west to east. Now remember that too. East to west and then back from west to east. Now he's describing a circle, and I'll prove this. Next passage from the Book of Enoch. And this was the verse in the Book of Enoch that just I could not make any sense of. And it's because I was applying it to the heliocentric worldview. But when I applied this motion to a flat earth, a flat circular plane, as if you're looking down from above, then it made sense. It says this: the sun sets in heaven, and returning by the north to proceed towards the east is conducted so as to enter by that gate and illuminate the face of heaven. That's the Book of Enoch, chapter 71, verse 8. There's another passage in the Book of Enoch, chapter 77, verse 4, that says this, and it applies it to both the sun and the moon. In the orb of the sun, there is a seventh portion of light, which is added to it from the moon. By measure it is put in until the seventh portion of the light of the sun is departed. They enter into the western gate, circuit by the north, and through the eastern gate go forth over the face of heaven, which you were talking about, the face of heaven. It also describes it many times, the face of the earth. Now, this is the big one that explains completely all of these motions. And you have to remember that what they are describing here is a circle, the sun moving from the east to the west and then back to the north and to the east in a circle, which is, how it moves in revolution around the North Pole as the center of the Earth plane. This is from first I'm going to read the King James Version of Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 5 through 7, and then the Targum version, which explains it in greater detail. It says this: "The sun also ariseth, and the sun goeth down, and hasteth to his place where he arose. The wind," verse 6, "the wind goeth toward the south, and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits." Now, in the Targums, what is different is that in verse 6, whereas it attributes the motion, the south and northward motion, to the wind, it actually in the Targum attributes this to the sun. And I'll explain why after I read the passage. It says this from the Targums, Ecclesiastes chapter 1. "The sun rises by day from the east side, and the sun sets on the west side at night. And it glides into its place going by the path of the deep. And it rises the next day from the place where it rose there yesterday. It goes along the whole south side by day, and returns to the north side by the path of the deep. Round and round it goes to the wind of the northern side at the period of Nisan and Tammuz, which are the vernal equinox and the summer solstice. And on its circuit it returns to the wind of the southern side at the period of Tishri and Tebet, which are the autumnal equinox and the winter solstice. It goes out from the eastern lattices at dawn and enters through the western lattices in the evening." Okay, so what Solomon actually is describing here is exactly what Enoch described as the motion of the sun and moon through the six gates of heaven. And as I explained in the show that we did previously, the six gates of heaven are broken down in, you have to subdivide the space, the expanse between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. That there are three gates below the equator, which connect the Tropic of Capricorn with the equator. Those are the first three gates. The first gate is directly above the Tropic of Capricorn. The second gate is in the middle between the Tropic of Capricorn and the equator. And the third gate above the Tropic of Capricorn actually touches the equator. And then the next three gates are the fourth, fifth, and sixth gate. The fourth gate is directly above the equator, moving towards the Tropic of Cancer. The fifth gate is the area in the exact center between the equator and the Tropic of Cancer. And then the sixth gate is the one that touches the Tropic of Cancer. And so what Solomon is describing here is the movement of the sun as it moves towards the north. And in the book of Enoch, and I explained this in great detail in the portion of the book on the tabernacle of the sun, Enoch describes the motion of the sun beginning on the vernal equinox when it's located right above the equator. And then it moves north. For 90 days, 91 days, it moves north until it reaches the Tropic of Cancer. And the reason he does so is because God's calendar, according to the ancient Hebrew lunar calendar, the seasons begin with spring, and spring begins when the sun is exactly on the equator. The vernal equinox begins the season of spring. For 91 days, it moves towards the Tropic of Cancer. When it gets to the Tropic of Cancer for the summer solstice, that begins summer. And then it reverses course and starts to move south, which is what Solomon says. He says, round and round it goes to the wind of the northern side. That's it moving towards the north. In the period of Nisan and Tammuz, the vernal equinox occurs in the Hebrew month of Nisan. The summer solstice occurs in the Hebrew month of Tammuz. And then after it reaches the Tropic of Cancer, it reverses course. And then he says, and on its circuit, it returns to the wind of the southern side at the period of Tishri and Tibet. So Tishri, that's when the autumnal equinox happens. And when the sun reaches the Tropic of Cancer, it reverses course. It begins moving for 90 days towards the towards the equator. On the 91st day, it will reach the equator for the autumnal equinox, and then it moves into the southern latitudes, into the what I call the southern hemisphere plane. And then for the next 90 days, it will move from the equator to the Tropic of Capricorn. It will reach the Tropic of Capricorn in the Hebrew month Tibet, which is when the winter solstice occurs. And then it will reverse course on that 91st day. It will reverse course, and then for the next 90 days, move back towards the equator. And then when reaching the equator, also the winter solstice begins those season of winter, and the autumn, when it reaches the autumnal equinox, that actually begins the season of fall. And so when it reaches the equator again, then that ends the year and it begins a whole new season. And this is exactly what Enoch describes for the motions of the sun through the six gates of heaven, as I explain in great detail in that book and the video that I did explaining how to apply the flat earth as key to decrypt the book of Enoch, the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries.
Dude, my mind is like exploding over here because as you're talking, I pulled up the video that I made back on, when did I post this? August 7th. Oh, wow. Almost exactly a year ago. August 7th, 2015, I did the animation, How the Four Seasons Work on the Flat Earth Model.
Yes. Exactly.
That was based off of, interestingly enough, spinning heliocentric ball Earth software,
right?
Stellarium, by simply changing the camera settings and setting my location to Antarctica. And when I did that, I got sort of this, upward view, and then I just flipped it to horizontally so that to have a downward view. And as you were talking, I'm watching this animation go around, and that finally made sense to me now, because I had read some of those passages and I'm like, I understand it going east to west, but I didn't understand it going north to south until I watched this animation while you were describing that.
Yes.
And for those of you guys listening to this, you could go to my YouTube channel and just search for How the Four Seasons Work on the Flat Earth Model, and then rewind this archive that we're talking about right now. Listen to Zen say what he just said while watching that animation, and wow, I mean, okay, so that, because what the animation shows is not only is the sun and moon going around in a circle over the circle of the earth, but it's tightening its circle,
right,
and it's expanding its circle. So in essence, it's turning toward the north to tighten, and then at certain times of the year it's turning toward the south to expand. And it not only does it contract and expand, but it also slows down and speeds up.
Yes, exactly.
Which is extraordinary, and I don't know if because I'm a visual person, I don't know if I would have got that just listening to you.
I'm glad you pulled that up. And when I actually create the video, if you don't mind, I will post that into it so that people can understand, because these passages, the knowledge of these teachings have been lost, as we said, for at least the last half millennia. And people were not able to understand them. And it's because, we've been indoctrinated into the heliocentric worldview, which is a false doctrine. And the fact that all of this information has been encoded into not just the Bible, but all of these extra biblical texts, in my mind, affirms them as being divinely inspired, because they verify the veracity and the authenticity of the biblical account, the Genesis narrative, as given to Moses by the Most High God. And, you can take it exactly for what it is. You don't have to accommodate. You don't have to try to mold it and make it fit our preconceived notions as far as the heliocentric worldview.
Yeah. If you try to take these ancient texts, including the Bible, and try to do like Doug Hamp and others have tried to do and failed miserably, in my opinion, is take the text and try to jujitsu wrestle, mangle the text to try in some vain attempt to make it match the spinning helium. It's totally fruitless. And when I went to circling back around to the title of your book, The Firmament, Vaulted Dome of the Earth, when I went back to look at the Book of Enoch again after having sort of my worldview switched to look at this as a snow globe, in no uncertain terms, you turn to First Enoch chapter 89. Look at Enoch's enclosed world. My take on the Book of Enoch is I call it a synchronized, biblically endorsed extra-biblical text. And the reason I call it that is because there's several books, namely Enoch, Joshua, and Jubilees, that are not found in our current canonized text. Enoch, however, has been in and out of various canons, depending on who you're talking to. The Ethiopians still have it in their Bible to this day as a canonized piece of scripture. Whatever. I just say, hey, it's synchronized in the sense that it follows the same chronological order of events that we find in Genesis. I say it's biblically endorsed because there are probably hundreds of references in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, many of which find precedence only in the book of Enoch. So it shows that the authors were clearly aware of this book. Like Genesis chapter 6, Moses throws a word out, Nephilim. He feels no further need to explain it. Well, that presupposes that Moses knew what the Nephilim were, and so did his audience because he didn't have to explain it to them, right? Peter and Jude talking about angels that sinned, that were left their first estate, that are bound in chains. We get that text. We don't find anything anywhere about angels that are bound up. You might say Lucifer and his angels were rebellious. Yeah, but they're still out and about. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, spiritual wickedness in high places. The devil still goes about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Right? They're still out and about. So who are the ones that were bound in chains and put somewhere? You don't have any frame of reference for that whatsoever, unless you read the book of Enoch. And Jude basically cut a paragraph out of Enoch and put it in his book. So, the way I look at it, if we accept that the Bible is divinely inspired by the Holy Spirit, written by men, then that's a pretty good endorsement by the Holy Spirit. I would be jazzed out of my mind if the Holy Spirit inspired an author of Scripture to, hey, cut and paste out of Rob's book. That would do pretty good on sales, wouldn't it? Yeah. So, I think it's at the very least, it's an authoritative text. And when you get to chapter 89, this is how Enoch, who has a vision of the coming flood, describes it. He says, and again, I raised mine eyes toward heaven and saw a lofty roof, i.e. the firmament, with 7 water torrents thereon, and those torrents flowed with much water into an enclosure. Huh? And I saw again, and behold, fountains were opened on the surface of that great enclosure, and that water began to swell and rise upon the surface, and I saw that enclosure till all its surface was covered with water. Do you see what he's saying? It's sort of like the flood was just filling up a bathtub, an enclosure. It's a lot different than the description we would think of the flood covering a ball. He's talking about a roof opening up and an enclosure filling up. With that in mind, when you read Genesis and it talks about the windows of heaven being opened, I got to be honest, when I look at the two models, the one on the left makes a lot more sense to me with that description. I mean, it was a slam dunk. I'm like, right. It's a whole lot easier to fill up a snow globe, a bathtub, than a ball. If we're talking about flooding the earth, this makes perfect sense. And we got like 8 minutes left, so we're definitely going to have to do a part 2. In the next 8 minutes or so, let's talk some more about the vaulted dome. You mentioned I love BibleHub.com also, And earlier you talked about Amos 9:6, which is, if you're a King James only guy, you completely miss it. King James says, "It is he that buildeth his stories in the heaven and hath founded his troop in the earth." You're like, what? But like all the other translations pretty much talk about this vault that's set upon the earth, and the New American Standard is the one that just comes right out and calls it a vaulted dome. But many of the other ones use the word vault also. And although the King James 2000, kind of a newer, updated version of the King James, also uses vault. So what did you find? Why did the King James use troop? Did you look into that at all? Or
Well, when you look up the word aguda, which is the Hebrew word which they used, well, the King James translates that as troop. It actually speaks about binding, like in a group of men, which is why they used the King James translated as troop, or binding in this case, the firmament to the earth, which makes a lot more sense. Because if you read the first portion of the chapter or the passage, it says the one who builds his upper chambers in the heavens. So it's actually speaking about first where the Most High God sits upon the dome of the earth and where the heavenly temple is created. And in my mind, and I explained this in great detail in this particular chapter, that when you look at the context of the passage, it should be translated as the vaulted dome which binds the earth to the firmament.
wow, that's awesome. Yeah, because right in the King James, it's he that buildeth his stories in the heavens. So you got this idea of stories or levels being built in heaven, but founded his troop, his was it Aguda?
Yes, Aguda.
Being like bound together, attached, as it were, to the earth.
Right.
Ah, that's awesome.
Which, if you look at the word aguda, the definitions are band, binding, cords, bands, thongs, slavery, bunch of hyssop, a band of men or troops, and the fourth one, vault of the heavens or firmament, as in binding the earth to the heavens.
Wow, that is awesome. Man, that's a weird boy. My mind is just like, I wish we had another 2 hours right now to start talking.
Right.
Are you available next week?
Oh yeah, I'm totally down for it.
Let's just go ahead and plan that then. Before we run out of time, where can people get this book as well as your other one on the decrypting the Book of Enoch?
The Flat Earth as Key to Decrypt the Book of Enoch. You can go to lulu.com, amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com, or if you want to order autographed copies from me, I don't charge to sign them. Just contact me at zengarcia.com, email me on Facebook, or my email is zengarcia2010@gmail.com. And, this is my 10th book, so I also provide discounts if people are interested in any of my other books. There's a whole bunch of them, and I'm not going to name them all now. But, yeah, I most certainly will be glad to do a follow-up show. It will also give you a week to peruse through the material because, as I said, this book is 456 pages. My previous book is 400 and something pages, the Flat Earth book. And so there's a lot of information.
Yeah, fantastic. Did you happen to catch the show or have looked into any of the work that Andrew Hoy has done on the Tabernacle in the Wilderness?
No, I haven't even heard of him.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to send you on an interesting rabbit trail then.
Cool. Yeah.
I did an interview with him. I think I posted it early. I think it was the first show in January that I did. But anyway, project314.org. It was a structural engineer, wasn't into flat earth or anything like that. He had spent time in Israel and really kind of obsessed with looking at the tabernacle in the wilderness. Now, as a structural engineer, he's looking at the shopping list that's given to Moses because Moses was shown a blueprint, right, that he was supposed to emulate here on earth. And which means the shopping list that was given to Moses was everything and only what he needed to construct this thing. But he's like, if you look at any model of the tabernacle that's typically set up that people, will create, a replica or whatever, they have to add a whole bunch of hardware that's not given in the shopping list. Added rope, added pegs, and things like that to stabilize, because a rectangle is one of the least structural supported, things you can build, certainly in the wilderness. So he's looking at this thing. He's like, well, the Torah says you cannot add to or subtract from. And if he's shown a blueprint and given a shopping list, then you can't add any of these extra things. And if you don't add those things, then this thing would never have made it in the wilderness. So he's like racking his brain looking at it, and he realized the key is in the description of the curtains. And he says the reason everybody comes up with a rectangular box is because they make the assumption that you connect the curtains, they're long rectangular strips, that you connect the curtains on the long end. And he said, but there's nothing in the text that demands that you do that. So he said, well, I wonder what would happen if I connect the curtains on the short end. And when he did, you end up with a 6-story high domed tent in the wilderness.
Wow.
Now, he's not looking at the flat earth doing anything like that. This is just a structural engineer looking at the text and trying to take it literally without adding or subtracting from the text. And this is what he comes up with. Right? So through a series of other people contacting him, and he ends up finding some of my material, sees this animation and this drawing that I did of the Yahuwah's terrarium, and he's looking at this dome world, and he's looking at this model that he's created.
Right.
And he's like, I got to contact this guy. So he contacts me. And just today, just this afternoon, I read about this guy who was a 6th century Egyptian monk named Cosmos. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. But anyway, he developed an incredibly detailed description in the 6th century of the ancient cosmology based on the construction of the specifications of the Jewish tabernacle. And he's of the snow globe mentality in the 6th century.
Wow.
So it looks like Moses was basically given a bird's eye view of Yahuwah's footstool.
Yes, exactly.
The dome world.
Really quick before we run out of time, the reason I'm saying wow to all of this is because I wrote in this particular book how the blueprint for the heavens laid out in the way that they are laid out is also depicted in Noah's Ark, Moses' wilderness tabernacle, and also Solomon's temple, that it divides it into the 3 heavens, which is something we'll have to go into in the next show. But since you just told me that, I'm blown away, because the blueprint for the 3 heavens and the vaulted dome of the earth and the Most High having established his tabernacle in the heavenly temple on the very top of the vaulted dome of the earth is in each one of those blueprints, as I also talk about in this book.
Crazy. Wow. Hey, Zen, this was an awesome show. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure, brother. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to next week.
For sure. Thank you guys for listening to the Revolutionary Radio Project. We'll see you back next Wednesday night, 11 p.m. Central. Good night, everybody.